Welcome. Today we're going to be conducting an examination of a case that is particularly painful and difficult to discuss.
It really is.
But it's one that is essential to understand based on the legal and factual record that's available. We're focusing on the documentation surrounding the tragic 2021 murder of 13-year-old Tristyn Bailey in St. John's, Florida.
Right.
Our goal here is clarity. It's to synthesize the sequence of events, the evidence that was presented, and, the subsequent court process. We want to ensure that you, the listener, are thoroughly informed about every stage of this case as it was reported.
And that objective framework is crucial here, especially given the sheer severity of the facts.
Absolutely. We approach this with the seriousness it demands. It's about factual reporting, not emotion or speculation.
And I think we have to immediately establish the foundation of the case. Tristyn Bailey, a 13-year-old middle school cheerleader, was killed by her 14-year-old schoolmate, Aiden Fucci, on Mother's Day, May 9th, 2021.
On Mother's Day.
On Mother's Day. And the brutality of it. I mean, that is the single most shocking fact that underpins the entire legal prosecution. The medical examiner confirmed she sustained 114 stab wounds.
114. That number, it's what immediately set this case apart. It demonstrated not just a violent act, but an extended, horrific assault.
A prolonged event, yes.
But before we get further into the details of the crime itself, I think it's important to center our understanding on the person whose life was stolen.
Yes, very important.
Let's talk about Tristyn Bailey. She was born Tristyn Bailey on January 18th, 2008. She was the youngest of 5 children to Forrest and Stacy Bailey.
And the sources provide a lot of context that really humanizes this immense tragedy.
Right.
For instance, she spent her earliest years, the first 4, living with her family in Singapore.
In Singapore, wow.
Yes, before they moved to Florida. And at her school, Patriot Oaks Academy, she was popular 7th grader and a dedicated cheerleader. Her character was consistently described in testimony and interviews as that of an energetic young girl who always stood up for her friends.
That says a lot about her.
It does. And her mother, Stacy Bailey, she powerfully reflected that Tristyn was a powerful child that was able to give a lot to so many. Understanding the vibrancy of the life that was lost, it just makes the timeline that we're about to discuss so much more devastating to process.
Okay, so let's move directly into that timeline, specifically the early morning hours of Mother's Day, May 9th, 2021. The day started not with celebration, but with panic.
Complete panic.
Around 9 a.m., one of Tristyn's older siblings went to her room to wake her up for the holiday, and she was gone. Her bed hadn't been slept in.
And an initial search of the house confirmed it. She wasn't there. Her mother, Stacy, she called 911 shortly after that, which initiated the missing persons report. A report that would very quickly turn into a murder investigation.
And the initial police work, it pointed investigators toward one person almost immediately.
Aiden Fucci. The reports indicate that he had contacted Tristyn, likely through social media or text, and he convinced her to leave her home in the very early hours of the morning.
And what was the pretense?
The pretense was that they were going to see a friend. This contact, drawing her out in the middle of the night, was really the first documented step that the state used to argue premeditation. They were able to rely heavily on surveillance evidence from the neighborhood to piece together what turned out to be a critical 7-minute window.
And that surveillance footage, it was captured by a residential camera on Saddlestone Drive. This becomes the absolute cornerstone of the prosecution's timeline.
It is. It visually confirms their movements.
Yeah.
At 1:45 a.m., it shows both Tristyn Bailey and Aiden Fucci walking east together down the road.
And they are clearly visible, heading toward that wooded area where her body would eventually be found.
But this is where the timeline becomes just horrifyingly definitive. Just 7 minutes later, at 1:52 a.m., the exact same camera captures a subject.
A single subject.
A single subject, running back west along Saddlestone Drive. And that person was conclusively identified as Aiden Fucci. Crucially, he was running alone.
And there's one more detail captured there, something that was cited repeatedly in the documentation. He was carrying something.
Yes, he was carrying a pair of white shoes in his hands as he fled the scene.
That detail about the shoes is critical, and we need to pause on it for a moment. Why would investigators focus so intently on a pair of white shoes being carried?
Well, you have to think about what it suggests. It strongly suggests an intent to avoid leaving trace evidence or, making noise.
Right, so he's thinking about his escape.
He's thinking about concealment. When you run barefoot or in socks on hard pavement, you're much less likely to leave clear footprints. You're quieter. It aids in both concealing the act and getting away. This 7-minute gap, where two people walked to a location and only one person fled quickly and alone, it became the unshakable foundation for the time of death and for Fucci's involvement.
And it directly contradicted every story he would later try to tell.
Every single one.
The search ended later that same day. At approximately 6 p.m. on May 9th, a resident who was just out for a walk near a retention pond in that wooded area at the end of Saddlestone Drive.
They discovered her body. Law enforcement confirmed her identity around 8 p.m., and at that point, the case officially transitioned from a high-stakes missing persons investigation to a homicide.
And once the body was recovered, the medical examiner's report, it confirmed that extraordinary level of violence we mentioned earlier.
Yes, the 114 stab wounds. And it wasn't just a shocking number. Those wounds became critical evidence in the legal process. The state attorney's office categorized 49 of those 114 wounds as defensive in nature.
49 defensive wounds. So legally, what does that finding establish when you're prosecuting a case like this?
It establishes two key things that directly counter any attempt by the defense to claim this was an accident or just an impulsive act. First, it definitively shows that Tristyn was conscious and was actively fighting for her life for a prolonged period.
So this wasn't quick.
Not at all. This indicates immense terror and suffering, which significantly raises the severity of the crime in the eyes of the court. And second, and this is probably most important for the murder charge, the number of wounds and the struggle. It completely undermines Fucci's later claims that she just fell and hit her head.
There's no way a fall causes that.
Exactly. A struggle of that magnitude, with nearly 50 defensive wounds, it completely solidifies the state's argument for severity and premeditation. I mean, it takes a considerable amount of time and sustained malicious intent to inflict 114 wounds.
And then there was the grim evidence related to the weapon itself. A buck knife was found.
It was located in that nearby retention pond, and the documentation confirms the knife was missing its tip.
And the connection to the victim was definitive.
Completely definitive. During the autopsy, forensic pathologists recovered the missing tip of that same knife embedded in Tristyn's scalp.
Oh, wow.
So this detail, it physically and forensically links the discovered weapon directly to her death, leaving absolutely no reasonable doubt about the murder weapon used by Fucci.
The crime scene documentation also included some highly unusual and disturbing markings found on the victim?
Yes, it did. The sources confirmed that the word karma was written on the inside of her left ankle, and a smiley face was drawn on her right ankle.
And do the sources say who wrote that?
The sources don't explicitly state who made them, but it's a chilling detail that certainly suggested a kind of taunting or sadistic element to the crime.
And that must have fueled the public and legal narrative of a deeply disturbed perpetrator.
It did. And those markings, regardless of who made them, contributed to the state's eventual finding that this crime was committed purely for the satisfaction of the killer rather than any kind of relational motive.
So with all this overwhelming physical evidence in place, investigators quickly focused their attention back on Fucci.
Right. And when they initially interviewed him, he tried to construct an alibi. He claimed that after leaving a friend's house, a friend named Abshur, around 1:10 a.m., he walked Tristyn only part of the way home.
And then what did he say he did?
He claimed he'd just wandered around alone for an extended period, eventually getting back to his own house at around 3:30 a.m.
That narrative, it must have fallen apart immediately under scrutiny.
Immediately. The walk between their houses was only estimated to take about 30 minutes. A gap of over 2 hours for a kid in a suburban neighborhood in the middle of the night was highly suspicious, even before they had the surveillance footage to definitively counter it.
So when investigators pressed him on that timeline,
He abruptly changed his account.
and his revised story was a desperate attempt to explain why he was there and why he ran, but without admitting to murder.
Exactly. In his second version, he claimed an altercation happened after Tristyn supposedly attempted to touch his private parts. He then claimed he simply pushed her and that she fell and hit her head.
Which, of course, is a story that was utterly destroyed by the forensic evidence we just discussed.
Completely. A fall that results in a head injury is an entirely different legal and medical event than the calculated prolonged infliction of 114 stab wounds. Fucci's rapid shift from a vague alibi to this outright lie, it demonstrated to the prosecution his clear consciousness of guilt and his deceitful intent.
And perhaps the most chilling, widely circulated piece of evidence regarding his state of mind right after the arrest, it involves his behavior inside the patrol car.
Right. While being transported, he used Snapchat,
He's on social media.
He's on social media. I mean, the fact that he was focused on that, at that moment, it just speaks volumes about his profound lack of remorse or any comprehension of the gravity of the situation. He took pictures. He took videos.
And one of those pictures was captioned with an extremely callous question.
Yes. Hey, guys, has anybody seen Tristyn lately? It was a macabre joke. He was making light of a serious missing persons case that he knew had already resulted in murder.
And there's a video clip as well.
An equally disturbing one. It showed him saying, "We're having fun in the having cop car, Tristyn, if you walk out the dam." And then the video cuts off.
So this display of just mocking bravado while in custody, it provided the state with powerful evidence of his character.
His callous character, yes. And that evidence would later be central to the prosecution's case during the sentencing phase.
The official legal timeline really reflects the rapid escalation based on all this emerging evidence. Fucci was initially booked for second-degree murder, right? Around 3 a.m. on May 10th.
That's right. But once the medical examiner's report with the 114 wounds was combined with the surveillance footage, and this is key, his premeditated verbalizations to friends, the charge was officially upgraded. On May 25th, it became first-degree premeditated murder.
Okay, so for our listeners, let's just briefly clarify the crucial legal difference between those two charges. Why did the presence of premeditation make such a huge difference?
That's the pivotal distinction in criminal law, especially in Florida. Second-degree murder, it typically involves a spontaneous act. It's driven by sudden anger or malice, but without prior planning.
Okay.
First-degree premeditated murder, however, requires proof that the defendant consciously planned or designed or contemplated the act before carrying it out.
And the state argued that the overwhelming violence, the luring of the victim fleeing the scene, that all demonstrated planning.
Exactly. And this upgrade was essential because it made him eligible to be charged as an adult, which the state immediately pursued.
And supporting that move, the St. Johns County Sheriff, Robert Hardwick, he issued a really powerful public statement. He said, "This is no accident. This is a cold-blooded murder."
And that really set the tone for the difficult legal path ahead.
We should also detail the involvement of Fucci's mother, Crystal Smith. That added another layer of legal complexity to the initial investigation.
It did. Smith was arrested on June 4th for tampering with evidence.
And the evidence against her was caught on film, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Security camera footage recovered from inside their own home provided definitive proof. It showed her washing blood off Fucci's jeans on the evening of May 9th, shortly after the murder occurred.
So she was clearly attempting to obscure or destroy physical evidence that linked her son to the crime.
That's what the prosecution argued, and she later pleaded no contest in May of 2023.
So what does no contest mean in this context?
It's an important legal distinction. When a defendant pleads no contest, or nolo contendere, it means they're accepting the conviction and the punishment without formally admitting guilt in the legal record.
But for sentencing, it's treated like a guilty plea.
Exactly. It's treated the same. And she received a sentence of 30 days in jail for her attempt to cover up her son's actions.
Okay, so turning back to Aiden Fucci, he was formally charged as an adult, even though he was just 14 years old.
Right. And his initial legal representation, they quickly filed a motion to withdraw from the case. They cited irreconcilable differences, which is, not uncommon in these high-profile capital cases. He was then appointed a public defender.
And at his arraignment on June 3rd, 2021, before the full extent of the state's evidence was public, Fucci pleaded.
He initially pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder, and that set the stage for what was expected to be a long, contentious legal battle, one that would focus very heavily on that element of premeditation.
So let's elaborate on the evidence that the state attorney, R.J. Larrizza, presented to firmly establish that element of premeditation, because this was really the foundation for charging him as an adult.
The sources reveal some highly damaging evidence that came from Fucci's own peer group. Larrizza confirmed that Fucci had been talking about his intention to kill someone with his friends before the murder.
And this wasn't just a vague threat.
Not at all. It was specific planning. He had been telling friends he was going to kill someone by taking them to the woods and stabbing them.
That is an almost exact script of how the murder actually played out. The method, the location, it all mirrors the conversation he allegedly had beforehand.
Precisely. And what's more, the evidence indicated a timeline of intent. Fucci allegedly told his friends to expect the murder to happen within the month, stating that killing was imminent.
So this prior verbalization setting a timeline, detailing the method, identifying the location, It's about as strong as premeditation evidence can get.
It is, and it completely crushed any later defense claim that the act was just spontaneous or some accident from a sudden push. This evidence ensured the case would remain charged as first-degree murder, and that triggered the potential for that maximum life sentence.
Beyond the evidence itself, Fucci's conduct while in custody and during court proceedings became a significant focus.
It did. During a virtual hearing in September of 2021, Fucci began acting very erratically in front of the judge.
The documentation of that hearing is very unsettling.
It is. He was seen rocking back and forth uncontrollably. He started mumbling about demons taking my soul away, and he repeatedly asked the judge, "Where am I? What's going on?"
And the hearing had to be cut short.
It was. It was cut short due to the highly disruptive nature of his behavior, although the court did cite some technical issues as a co-reason. This erratic display became part of the defense's strategy, suggesting mental instability, maybe lack of fitness for trial, even though no formal incompetency finding was ever made.
That brings us to the defense's argument regarding his incarceration conditions. In November of 2022, his attorney requested a change of venue.
Right, arguing that Fucci had been held in solitary confinement for an astonishing period over 400 days at Duval County Jail.
And the defense framed this
as psychological torture. They argued the isolation was detrimental to his mental health and that it prejudiced his ability to receive a fair trial. They tried to use this prolonged isolation as a mitigating factor, suggesting his subsequent behavior and instability were results of his confinement rather than his inherent personality.
But the judge denied that motion.
The presiding judge, R. Lee Smith, denied it.
So that denial implies the court didn't find the confinement conditions egregious enough to warrant moving the trial, especially when you balance that against the need to ensure the safety and control of a violent defendant.
Exactly. And the documentation of Fucci's conduct while in that facility provides a stark contrast to the defense's narrative of a tormented juvenile. We really need to look at the incident report that was released in late January of 2023.
This report from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, it's extremely revealing.
It outlines a persistent pattern of extreme, violent, and manipulative behavior that just contradicted any claim of remorse or victimhood. His disciplinary history was extensive. It included extortion of commissary items from other inmates.
Meaning he used fear and intimidation.
Yes, using fear to force weaker inmates to surrender their personal goods.
And he wasn't just manipulative, he was consistently threatening violence.
Towards both inmates and staff, that's right. The report documents numerous instances of fighting and, critically, his repeated boasting about his crime.
He was boasting about it.
He was, and that's a crucial distinction. If a juvenile is truly remorseful or unstable due to isolation, they typically withdraw. Fucci did the opposite. He used his notoriety to establish dominance and terrorize other people.
The reports paint a picture of just relentless escalation. There was an October 2022 report that explicitly stated he was relentless in making threats. What specifics did they record?
They recorded him telling one inmate he would stab them up and take pictures of it.
Which mirrors the violence of Tristyn's murder and the callousness he showed on Snapchat.
Precisely. The report also documents multiple episodes where jail staff had to use force to control him. He was restrained using pepper spray at least twice and was put in a restraint chair on one occasion because of his explosive conduct.
So it sounds like his behavior escalated dramatically when he was challenged by authority.
It did. On one documented occasion, when correctional officers entered his cell to retrieve some items he wasn't supposed to have, he reacted with explosive fury. He was described as banging on his cell door in a loud, vicious manner, and he shouted explicit murder threats toward the correctional officers, specifically targeting their families.
Wow.
This level of threat was used by the prosecution to argue that Fucci remained an extremely dangerous individual with no respect for authority or human life, even after a long period of solitary confinement. This record provided ongoing evidence to the state that Fucci was beyond typical adolescent impulsivity.
So after nearly 2 years of this intense legal maneuvering and all this documentation of his instability and violence in custody, the case finally moved toward trial.
But then a sudden and dramatic shift.
Yes, on February 6, 2023, just before jury selection was scheduled to begin, Fucci reversed his plea. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder.
He admitted it.
He admitted fully and completely to killing Tristyn Bailey. And this avoided what would have been a lengthy and incredibly emotionally draining trial for the victim's family. During that guilty plea hearing, Fucci was given the opportunity to speak. The sources mention he apologized to the Bailey family and his own family, and he wrote an apology letter.
He did, but while he offered apologies, the legal system focused on the consequences. Because of his age 14 at the time of the crime, he was ineligible for the death penalty in Florida,
So the state was seeking the maximum sentence available.
which for a juvenile convicted of first-degree murder is life imprisonment. The minimum sentence, had the judge found mitigating factors, was 40 years.
So the sentencing phase became this battleground of expert opinion, really focusing on whether a 14-year-old who committed such a heinous planned act could ever be rehabilitated.
That's exactly where the two expert witnesses were pivotal. The prosecution's expert, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Greg Pritchard, he testified that based on Fucci's actions, both before and after the murder.
Specifically citing the Snapchat video and the jail violence.
Exactly. That his behavior was undeniably callous.
And what was Dr. Pritchard's conclusion about the prospect of rehabilitation?
He concluded that Fucci had not demonstrated any capacity for rehabilitation, and he strongly emphasized the sheer brutality of the attack to underscore premeditation. He argued, and I'm quoting here, inflicting 114 stab wounds, it takes a long time. There is thought going on in his head as this is playing out.
So that testimony serves to negate the idea of a crime committed in some sudden emotional blackout.
Right. It reinforces the state's argument for reflective, malicious intent.
The defense, however, they presented their own expert, Dr. Stephen Bloomfield, who tried to introduce mitigating factors based on juvenile brain science.
Dr. Bloomfield disputed the prosecution's findings. He based his argument on the widely accepted scientific fact that adolescent brains aren't fully developed, particularly in the regions that govern impulse control and long-term consequence assessment.
So he was arguing that this inherently mitigated Fucci's culpability to some degree.
Yes, and he also claimed that Fucci had expressed remorse and that the state lacked sufficient evidence to prove the murder was premeditated beyond a reasonable doubt. He was trying to persuade the judge toward that 40-year minimum.
The conflict here, it really encapsulates the central legal dilemma in sentencing juvenile offenders for adult crimes. You're trying to reconcile extreme violence with the recognized immaturity of a developing brain.
Absolutely. And which perspective the judge sided with would be the difference between 40 years and life?
And amidst all these technical arguments, the court heard the raw impact of the crime through the victim impact statements.
Delivered by Tristyn's family on March 21st and 22nd, 2023. And these statements, they moved the proceedings far beyond legal jargon and just focused on the human cost.
Tristyn's mother, Tristyn Bailey, she delivered a devastating and direct address to Judge R. Lee Smith, urging him to impose the maximum sentence.
She said, "Please do not for 1 second think Fucci could be rehabilitated at any point. He is beyond saving."
And she also spoke directly to him.
She did. She looked at him and said, "Aiden Fucci, you have destroyed me. You have destroyed my family." The weight of these statements coming from the victim's closest relatives provided this necessary counterpoint to the defense's focus on the defendant's youth and potential for change.
And maybe the most powerful moment of that entire sentencing hearing was the visual statement provided by Tristyn's sister, Alexis.
It deeply affected the entire courtroom. Alexis Bailey focused the court's attention completely on the physical violence her sister endured. She slowly and deliberately dropped 114 aquastone hearts into a glass jar.
One by one.
One by one, each heart representing a stab wound. The process of counting them out loud took several minutes, and it forced everyone present, including the judge, to confront the enormity of the suffering.
And after the family members gave their statements,
Every family member who delivered a statement then added a single white stone to that jar, symbolizing their final loss and remembrance.
the defense in turn presented their own emotional testimony. Fucci's grandmother pleaded for leniency.
She did. She acknowledged the horror of the crime, but she begged the court not to impose a sentence that would result in permanent separation. She said, "Please don't take him out of our lives forever. I know there is some good in Aiden." And this testimony offered really the only familial support for Fucci that was presented in the public record.
So in their closing arguments, the defense attorney, Rosemarie Peoples, she tried to consolidate all these mitigating factors to argue for that 40-year minimum. What did they emphasize?
Peoples pointed to a whole constellation of factors. Fucci's ADHD diagnosis, documented emotional neglect during his childhood, a family history of mental illness, and claims of a physically abusive stepfather. The argument was essentially that his unstable background and underdeveloped juvenile brain made him reactive and incapable of truly appreciating the consequence of first-degree murder.
And therefore deserving of a second chance after a substantial term.
Exactly.
Conversely, the state attorney, Jennifer Dunton, she closed forcefully, recommending the maximum life sentence.
She did. Dunton countered that Fucci was not merely impulsive. She cited his consistent pattern of impetuous behavior combined with that high level of premeditation.
Specifically, his telling his girlfriend he was going to kill someone soon.
Right. And his disciplinary problems that continued even in the controlled environment of the jail. She relied heavily on Dr. Pritchard's testimony.
That Fucci understood right from wrong.
Yes. Dunton stressed that Dr. Pritchard's testimony demonstrated Fucci understood the difference and was fully aware of the consequences of his actions. The state ultimately characterized the crime as extremely unique and extremely violent, arguing that the combination of premeditation, extreme brutality, and lack of remorse demonstrated a level of malice that mandated the life sentence, regardless of his age.
And the final judgment was delivered by Judge R. Lee Smith on March 24, 2023. At 16 years old, Aiden Fucci was sentenced to life in prison.
And because of his status as a juvenile at the time of the offense, that life sentence isn't necessarily life without parole in the traditional sense. Under Florida law, juvenile offenders sentenced to life are entitled to apply for a judicial review hearing after serving 25 years.
So while the sentence is life, the possibility of release, however remote, it does exist after 2.5 decades.
Correct.
Judge Smith's ruling included a strong statement detailing his reasons for imposing that maximum sentence. He called it the most difficult and shocking case he had ever presided over.
But his description of the motive is perhaps the most unique and disturbing finding in the entire legal record.
And it really is the defining conclusion of the case.
It is. Judge Smith went to great lengths to systematically eliminate every typical motive for murder. He stated clearly, this was not done out of greed. It was not done in retaliation, retribution, or revenge. It was not a crime of passion. It was not a crime that was committed because he felt rejected by her. It was not done in a fit of uncontrollable anger.
That complete absence of an external motive, greed, passion, anger, rejection, that's what makes this crime legally distinct and, frankly, profoundly terrifying.
Exactly. The judge concluded the motive was purely internal. His final ruling was there was no reason, there was no purpose. It was done for no other reason than to satisfy this defendant's internal desire to feel what it was like to kill someone.
So this finding that the murder was a cold, premeditated, purely thrill-based killing was the definitive factor in the court's decision.
It was. It underscored the unique and horrifying level of danger Fucci posed to society and justified the maximum life sentence.
Finally, we must acknowledge the steps the Bailey family has taken to ensure Tristyn's life and memory continue to have a lasting positive influence.
They established the Tristyn Bailey Memorial Foundation.
And the foundation's work has been instrumental in actual legislative change in Florida.
It has, which speaks to their determination to protect other families. The foundation successfully advocated for and helped enact a specific law that restricts the public disclosure of crime scene photographs of any minor who has been murdered in the state.
So this law ensures that victims and their families are shielded from the distribution of deeply sensitive and horrific images, safeguarding their privacy and dignity during the most traumatic of circumstances.
A very important piece of legislation in our memory.
If we are to take a final perspective on this tragic case, reflecting on the judge's definitive finding that this crime was committed solely to satisfy an internal, premeditated desire to kill, it really compels us to understand the unique danger posed by this kind of violence in youth.
The overwhelming evidence of premeditation, the extreme brutality, and the defendant's subsequent conduct. It legally determined this to be the deliberate act of an individual who wanted to feel the experience of taking a life.
And understanding the pathology that drives such a crime without any external provocation, seems vital as we analyze complex acts of juvenile violence in the future.
It does.
Thanks for listening.